This is John Strange with Selig Film News and Colin Stacy of Real Spirituality. We're talking today to Bill Schwarz from the DP of the film Late Bloomers. Welcome, Bill.
Thanks for having us.
Can you tell us a little bit about your film?
Well, Late Bloomers is a movie that's having its anniversary showing at the Dallas International Film Festival. We made this film. I say we. Gretchen and Julia Dyer were the writer and director, respectively, and I was the director of photography on the film. This film was made 22 years ago, and it screened at the Sundance Film Festival in 1996 as a screen at the festival. The Late Bloomers is about essentially a lesbian relationship, I guess, is one way of looking at it. You know, the two women who both work at a high school. One is the secretary for the school. The other one is the high school basketball teacher. Realize that they're unhappy in their life situation. One is alone. One is married with a husband and kids. And they realize they have an attraction for each other, and then they act on this attraction. The community responds sort of antagonistically, but in the end, the community, envelops their relationships. They end up getting married and live happily ever after. Not a very believable ending for 20 years ago, but a little more believable today.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So I was 8 in '96.
Okay.
So the world is a lot different now. Can you tell me, having the film played now, and then in '96, the world's changed a lot. Can you just reflect on that a little bit, and maybe how it played today?
I think the film, it's certainly a different time now, and dramatically different over the course of the last year or so. My stepson married his long-term partner just 2 months ago. And he was already with his partner 20 years ago when this film was made, but I would never have imagined that, during the making of the movie, that the ending of the film would have matched my stepson's life, And so yeah, there have been some dramatic changes over the last few years. It's going to be interesting to see how audiences accept the film today. The film's going into re-release, streaming release, and so it's going to be interesting to see if the times have changed and if people are willing to look at how we looked at this 20 years ago too. So,
some of the challenges you had shooting this back then, shooting on film and everything. Did you have any? I mean, you shot it where? Where did you shoot this one?
Shot in Dallas.
That's what I thought. How were the challenges of shooting on film back then versus what you're shooting on now?
This is we shot Super 16, a pretty common format back at that time because it's already a widescreen look at it. I think the biggest difference for us is that we didn't really have video assist at the time. We chose, from dollar standpoint, not to do it. So there was a lot more trust in some ways between the director and the cameraman in terms of what was going down on screen. The camera operator had to say, yes, we got this take, or no, we don't have this take, and we have to do it again. And from a working circumstance, it wasn't like today where you have a video village and everybody's looking at the image and the director comments, but then the PA comments, and it's not as the image as it's being made is not as easily seen. So, but that was common for films back then. Video assist was not a common thing until 15 years ago or so. So I think that was the biggest difference for us. As far as shooting film goes, we've been shooting on film for 100 and some years, so it's not that hard to do. I mean, I know you switched to digital format, early adopter with that,
yes.
but and so have I and all my motion work. But as far as making the images go, we use the same techniques then as we do today.
You say this is coming back as a streaming release. Is it going through any type of restoration or anything to be put on streaming or anything like that, or is there?
So without getting too in the weeds technically on this, when the film was released originally, we took the Super 16, we blew it up to a 35 millimeter print. So part of that process involved making a 35 millimeter negative of the film. So this became the master copy that all the other copies were printed from. That negative still exists. It's in pretty pristine condition. So when they went to make the new video transfer, they took that 35 millimeter Internegative, I guess is what it's called, and it's all in good shape. I'm sure it didn't take that much to get a great copy of the film. I believe that's been done already. Julia told me she did that out in LA a couple weeks ago.
Do you know which services are going to be running it?
No, I don't. Julie hasn't told me who the who picked it up in terms of distributing it. I'm intrigued to know. It's a question I have for her, I guess.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it because I plan on telling everybody about it.
I'd love to be. I haven't told James yet, but I'd love to be there. But I got a booking out of town on a job, so I'm not going to be able to make it on Wednesday night. So I'll probably be there for the rest of the festival, but I won't be able to be there for that. So
that's the beauty and the pain of our existence.
No, that's right. Exactly. Our time's
you got to go where the
not
money
always
is.
our own. So this interview, what media you have?
I'm
Ministry.
with an online publication called Real Spirituality.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
And what's the nature of that? Is what does it?
It's from a Christian perspective, faith-based perspective, and it's just it's a review site, and so we run criticism where we try to push into some more of the deeper themes of film and kind of how this presses it. It's not like let's proof text the film to find theology, but seeing film as a place of conversation.
Okay.
Entering in, so that's why I'm fascinated with how the film played back then and now, and just seeing.
Well, I'd be interested in that too. I mean, how you can approach it with an open perspective or closed perspective.
Exactly,
So I mean, how but you still come from a certain mindset, I
Sure.
guess, no?
And I mean, I believe the power of film is to put stories out there, and so part of my faith is being able to not just sit back and say, I know this person already, judge, I'm going to have my judgment, but to hear the story, to see the story play out, because we're humans, and I believe that's the power of film, is to mediate a story in a way that compels you to sit. I mean, you're sitting in front of a huge screen watching it, you have to pay attention, and and in that it helps you to love people more, to understand people more, and I think that's why I'm fascinated with this film, to see how, for people in my audience, how they will have a conversation with this film given 20 years, what all has changed.
Well, and I don't know that it's the 20 years has a big difference in sort of the context of the characters in the movie. It's a very positive look at life.
Yeah.
It shows two women who are unhappy in their situation, not for any really dramatic reason, but just that they feel that at some point that life is not all it was meant to be, and they take a very active role in trying to solve that. Certainly, there's some caricatures in how the opposition to them is presented, but I guess you maybe had to do that at some level just to sort of get that point across. But in the end, it's a very uplifting, community gets behind them sort of end result. I think, to me, of all the interviews I've had, this is probably the most intriguing, to see how your audience approaches this movie and takes the film.
And most, from our site's perspective, and maybe from our audience, there is a bit more of an open perspective to see, because at the end of the day, from my perspective, being a Christian, if we're made in God's image, that bears itself out in a lot of different ways, And so I'm not closed on that. So one of my favorite films of last year was actually Carol, and so it is interesting to see how having this film kind of play after the year. I've never seen it, so it'll be interesting to see.
So 20 years, So
like I said, I was 8 back then.
Yeah. It was interesting. My stepson was in a relationship with his partner 20 years ago, and when the film came out, and at that time I never imagined that they would end up getting married.
Sure.
But then they just got married, 2 months ago. So things do change. I think part of the problem with the movie early on was that it was too upbeat. It presented too rosy a picture of what life for somebody who had made this choice 20 years ago was going to face.
I was going to ask you, do you think it's wishful thinking on the part of the film itself?
And I think that was the problem with the film 20 years ago. I think critics, many film critics, realized that, said, and I've mentioned this in other interviews, that no way was this ever going to going to be a realistic scenario. Nobody was ever going to believe what has happened here, and I think the film it did well on festival circuit, it did well in certain target audiences, but as a general release, it did not do well. And I think the critics were right, because it was just too rosy a scenario, or maybe it became a self-fulfilling prophecy.
That's exactly.
A couple bad reviews sort of ended up sort of tanking the film.
It'll be good to have it playing again.
So yeah, no, it's great.
Well, awesome. So, what else do you have coming up?
My life has been interesting. I sort of stepped away from independent filmmaking in large part because distribution of independent films is such a tough thing. It's very difficult, and a lot of producers weren't really focused on getting films released. They wanted to make it, and I was willing to help them, but they weren't really willing to do what it took to get the film released. So I found a creative outlet shooting television commercials, and it's collaborative effort is just as enjoyable. The dollars are a little better, and also the time frame's a little better too. I'm not stuck on location for 3 months or 4 months. I get a chance to go away for a short while and then come back home. So that's been my life for the last few years. Although I miss it terribly. The creative lifestyle, the collaborative lifestyle of having an actor working out a scene, getting a performance, and then trying to fine-tune that performance, and then figuring out how best to cover that performance. That's a really challenging and exciting thing to do, And I do it a little bit. They play on some of the TV movies that come here. And it's always a lot of fun, but just from a career standpoint, I ended up shooting mostly TV commercials in the last while. But I miss it terribly.